if you have competence, you almost automatically have a feeling of where the edge of the competence is. Because after all, it wouldn't be much of a competence if you didn't know its boundary. And so I think you've asked a question that almost answers itself. And my guess is you do know what you're in all kinds of areas, and you do have all kinds of other areas where you know you'd be over your depth. I mean, you're not trying to play chess against Bobby Fischer or do stunts on the high trapeze if you've had no training for it. My guess is you know pretty well where the boundaries of your competence lies, and I think you also probably know pretty well where you want to stretch the boundary. And you've got to stretch the boundary by working at it, including practice.
One of the drawbacks to Berkshire, of course, is that Charlie and I, our circles largely overlap, so you don't get two big complete circles at all, but that's just the way it is. Probably why we get along so well, too. I would say this: if you have doubts about something being in your circle of competence, it isn't. You know, I mean, in other words, I would look down the lists of businesses, and I will bet you that you can, I mean, you can understand a Coke bottler, you can understand the Coca-Cola company, you can understand McDonald's, you can understand, you can understand in a general way General Motors. You may not be able to value it, but there are all kinds of business. You can certainly understand Walmart. That doesn't mean whether you decide whether what the price should be, but you understand Walmart. You can understand Costco. And if you get to something that your friend is buying, or that everybody says a lot of money's going to be made in, you're not sure whether you understand it or not, you don't. I mean, and it's better to be well within the circle than to be trying to tiptoe along the line. And you'll find plenty of things within the circle. I mean, it's not terrible to have a small circle of competence. I'd say my circle of competence is pretty small, but it's big enough. I can find a few things. And when somebody calls me with a Larson Jewel, that is within my circle of competence. I hadn't even thought about it before, but I know it's within it. I mean, I can evaluate a business like that. And if I get called, I got called the other day on a very large finance company. I understand what they do, but I don't understand everything that's going on within it, and I don't understand whether I can continually fund it, on a basis independent from using Berkshire's credit and so on. So even though I could understand every individual transaction they did, I don't regard the whole enterprise or the operation of it necessarily as being within my circle of competence.
Creative accounting is an absolute curse to a civilization. You can argue that one of the great inventions of man was double entry bookkeeping, where we could keep our economic affairs under better control. And it was a North Italian development spread by a monk. And anything that sort of undoes the monk's work by turning this great system into kind of a tool for fraud and folly, I think does enormous damage to the country. Now, I think a democracy is ordinarily set up so it takes a big scandal to cause much reform. And there may be some favorable fallout from Enron, because that was certainly the most disgusting example of a business culture gone wrong that any of us has seen in a long, long time. And what was it took in eventually a lot of nice people that you wouldn't have expected to sink into the whirlpool. And I think we'll always get Enron-type behavior, but it may be moderated some in the next few years.
Well, population projections are just that. They're projections, and they've been notoriously inaccurate over the years. And the gentleman that made the motion referred to a recent New York Times story, and there are projections that, based on fertility rates and what happens to them in different countries under different economic conditions and all that. I mean, you can come up with all kinds of projections. I don't know the answer on it. Nobody does at any given time. And the carrying capacity of the Earth has turned out to be a lot greater than people have thought in the past. But there is some amount that does relate to the carrying capacity. It may have been expandable, but it's not infinitely expandable. And I would suggest that the errors of being on the low side in terms of population rather to estimated carrying capacity, the danger from those errors is far, far less than the dangers from overshooting in terms of population compared to carrying capacity. And since we don't know what carrying capacity is or will be 100 years from now, I think that generally that mankind has an interest in making sure it doesn't overshoot in terms of population. And if it, there's no great penalties attached to undershooting at all that I see. And it's very, it's the old analogy. If you were going to go on a spaceship for 100 years and you knew in the back of the spaceship there were a lot of provisions, but you didn't know exactly how much. In terms of filling the front of the spaceship with a given number of people, you would probably err on the low side. I mean, if you thought maybe it could handle 300 in terms of the provisions, I don't think you'd put 300 people in there. I think you'd put about 150 or 200, and you'd figure that you just didn't know, for sure the spaceship would get back in 100 years. You wouldn't know how much was in the back, and you would be careful in terms of not overshooting the carrying capacity of whatever the vehicle you were in. And we were in a vehicle called Earth. We don't know its carrying capacity. We learned that it's a lot larger than might have been thought by Malthus or somebody a few hundred years ago. But that doesn't mean it's infinite at all. And the one thing I will assure you is that the projections that were run in the New York Times, a few weeks ago are not going to be the ones that are going to be run 50 years from now or 30 years from now. And it's not the sort of thing that is cured after the fact. I mean, you're not going to go around trying to intentionally reduce the population. It's much better to prevent population growth than to try and correct afterwards. And Garrett Hardin has got some interesting stuff on that. Charlie?
Yeah, I will say that the whole controversy has been interesting in the way both sides don't understand the other side's model. By and large, population alarm side, the ecology side, they've always underestimated the capacity of modern civilization to increase carrying capacity. And the more they underestimate, why the less they seem to learn. That is not to the credit. And the other side has equal folly. I think you're just talking about the human condition. It's a complicated, controversial subject, and people feel strongly about it, and they learn slowly. And I just think that's the way it's going to be as far ahead as you can see.
The chances of a world inhabited by 15 billion people having behavior on average better than if the world were inhabited by 5 billion people is low. But, we'll never find a way to test that. But that's my instinct on it.